Welcome back to the Joanne Avison podcast. And today we're exploring how your fascia doesn't just hold tension or trauma, it holds you, your wisdom, your story, and it's been speaking all along. Let's just take a moment to pause. Take a breath. And if you can bear it, slow this video down just a tiny bit, 0.9, 0.8, just to take part in the pauses and breathe. So we're listening to the in-between. So you're going to remember how I describe fascia as the spiritual interface. And so many of you wrote in to say that this really helped you to make sense of why you feel things before you understand them. But what if fascia doesn't just carry our spirit, like this sense of information coming in, but also carries our wisdom that helps us to make choices as we go along? We now know that fascia is probably the most richly innovated sensory tissue of proprioception. Perhaps not innovated in the way that we think of the nervous system in the classical teaching of anatomy, but more in the way as if it's a sensory fabric in and of itself. That is, the tissue of proprioception, interoception, exteroception, they're both aspects of that, but we don't want to divide it down. What we want to do is think of, what does proprioception mean? So proprio is Latin for one's own, and ception comes from perception. So proprioception means one's own sense of oneself, one's own self-sensing. It's a little bit like a reflexive verb in French, that it comes back on the person speaking it. So it's not just perception, it's proprioception. It's perception of self-sensing. It's perception of self-awareness. So that includes emotional sensing. It includes being aware of how we're listening. So when we hear the analytical part of us making its deductions, bringing in the narrative, perhaps even speaking a default narrative that we've had since we were children, we can hold it in ever such a slightly different way, where you may have had a situation. I've had clients come to me saying, it was as if my body knew before I did it. Like, they'll say something to me like, I bent down to pick a letter up off the mat, and I knew not to do it. And then my back went. It was like I knew. Or I sat thinking about somebody that I haven't spoken to for ages. And suddenly there's a text on my phone from that person. And it was as if I knew before I thought of them that I was going to be in touch with them. So the hallmark of these things is that we sense something before the mind has actually deduced what it is, why it's happened, how it's happened. So the commentary doesn't necessarily precede the event. It's as if the sensory awareness senses the event before the commentary. And somehow both the story of the story, the narrative of say, a trauma or an upset, it can be something big or something small, can live in the fascia, but so can the wisdom. So in other words, can we go into ourselves for the situation that concerns us, but also the power, the resource, the wisdom that can unfold what we do next? And logic doesn't always heal. What do I mean by that? Well, I remember speaking to somebody once who said to me, I've had my DNA tested. I take all the supplements that I need for my DNA type, and I eat what I'm supposed to eat, and I exercise every single day for an hour and a half, and I do this and I do that. And it was as if he had a formula as a result of the logic of the DNA. Well, that's lovely, beautiful, left brain oriented, data-based information. What I'm talking about here is this subtle sense that that might not be the formula, and we might have thrown out the feeling of this form. The formula's at its expense, if that makes sense. Because there's a sensory awareness that something's really right for you at the time that can sometimes be more powerful and more real than the formula. So let me give you an example of that. In the formula, this guy's told to train an hour and a half every single day. Now, one of the things we know about the fascial matrix, the collagen matrix, is that when it does very excessive training, it goes into something called collagen deficit for a period of time, which is about 30 hours. And this is average. This isn't necessarily an elite athlete, but it's average. Now, if this guy has done really intensive training for an hour and a half every day as part of his formula, he might reach a stage by the end of that week where he hasn't quite come out of collagen deficit into collagen synthesis in good time. That might accumulate in his fascia. And then one of his kids wakes him up in the middle of the night and he doesn't get a lot of sleep. And then the next day he goes and plays a game of football with his friends and he's kind of relaxed. He's not really attentive. His tissue's tired. So instead of having its anticipatory power, there's something about it that's a bit drained, that hasn't taken into account the fact that he hasn't had the usual sleep pattern. And it just might be that in its tiredness, he goes over on his ankle. He can't anticipate. He can't quite stay up on his toes. He can't quite work with his spring-loaded elastic recoil because it's tired. It's in collagen deficit. Now, he's still got the formula. He's still taking the supplements. He's still got the same DNA profile. But something in the present moment has changed. The emergent properties of that moment, i.e., the things that result uniquely from those things coming together, is an element of fatigue that he hasn't allowed for in his tissue. And the wisdom might have been, do you know what, I just fancy resting today. And that might have been something he thought, oh, no, I've got to stick to my protocol. When in his heart, he kind of knew, his body kind of knew that he needed to rest that day. He didn't have a good reason why. I've just given you that. But the awareness kind of told him in advance that something was a little bit out. Now, that's one single story, and there's thousands of them, but fascia responds much faster than cognition. It's a preemptive organization, meaning its sensory receptors are working 24/7, even when you're asleep. If there's nothing wrong and you're healthy and well, usually you don't fall out of bed. Your fascia is kind of on guard all the time for where you are in space. And that cognition takes place at the speed of very subtle vibration, the speed of sound. It's the speed of light, actually, through the tissue. And it goes beyond intellectual understanding. Now, I've talked about this before. We have our intellectual understanding, mostly left-brained. We have our intuitive awareness, perhaps mostly right-brained, although both are existing in both. But together, they come out in our instinctive awareness. And I'm suggesting that this guy's instinct said, stop. Intellectually, he's got his formula, but he hasn't taken it into consideration that intuitive hit was actually based on fascia feedback through his body that knew before his mind understood. We all have it. And we just don't give this subtle awareness credit always because we've got the formula. What I'm trying to say is that this wisdom flows with us day to day in the present, aware of us. And what I'm trying to do is perhaps sprinkle in the seasoning of a deeper wisdom that the fascia incorporates. So we could think of fascia a little bit like the riverbed that's shaped by the land. And it also incorporates the water that moves through the river. So they are shaping each other because fascia is a fluid matrix and the structural architecture of us. It's got different qualities of bound water. So it binds the water that flows through us. It just doesn't run, apart from urine and perhaps tears. But even saliva is a little bit sticky because it's basically we're made of bound water. But the binding is soft matter and it's got different qualities of stiffness. So if it's got hydroxyapatite in it, it's stiff like bone and very crystalline. And then we've got myofascia and tendons, which is different again. It's a kind of fascia that's got muscle protein in it. And tendons and ligaments have got a different quality. They've got this very strong, dense weave. And then we've got the rest of our tissues, this fluid matrix of bound proteinous water. It's all got variations on the theme of collagen in it. But what that means is that the fascia forms the hardnesses of the riverbed and the fluidity of the river itself moving through it. And they co-create, co-organize each other. It's very hard to get our heads around. It's like we are made of this stuff and it's sensory and it's formed under tension. It's a pre-stiffened architecture. That's another whole story, which we're going to tell at another time, but it matters. It's why we resonate with that vibration. And it's why the language of fascia is listening. Your fascia is listening to you. And it does so, in fact, it's in conversation with you, with really subtle cues. Things like people will say there's tightness, or my posture's gone funny, or I feel out of sorts, or they'll experience things like chills or goosebumps. I think you call it goose flesh in America. They're little tiny micro whispers, fascia whispers. It is a listening tissue. So let's imagine that we can tune in to our tissue. We want to be able to tune our tissue and tune into it because it already has an optimum way. Not as a goal, but as an expression. This isn't something necessarily that we're seeking to achieve. It's something that we're seeking to express. So, for example, slowing your breathing down a little bit. Perhaps if you're currently breathing in for 2, out for 2, you can take a moment to tune into your breathing and breathe in for 4 and out for 4. The tissue remembers who you are becoming. And that's something we explore really beautifully with very specific techniques in very specific sequences in Myofascial Magic in Action. Because what we've discovered is that we can restore and remember the remarkable human blueprint that's actually designed for micro practices. Now, these don't replace what you love doing, whether it's Pilates or yoga or martial arts or bungee jumping, whatever. This is for everyday movements to enhance your system so that you become really tuned to what your body needs at the time. And some days that might be a really good long run so that you're properly exercised. And other days that might be a very gentle, subtle training that enhances the tissue and improves collagen synthesis. So we can do all sorts of things. We can learn to slowly scan our bodies and just do, I call it somatic scanning. Sometimes it's called self-sensing. Sometimes it's called self-referencing. We just literally run through the body, imagining that we're listening to it or we're seeing it from head to toe or toe to head. Or you can tune in if you have a more kinesthetic bias and simply sit wherever you are now, if you're walking, or if you're standing, whatever you're doing. See if you can hear your pulse. See if you can feel or sense your heartbeat. Imagine that's life confirming that you're alive. And these are things that lots of people love playing with when they do things like improvised movement. You can start, for example, doing some little movements, even if you're just at your desk, just rolling your wrist, or seeing what happens when you spiral your hand from the little finger first in both directions, and then what happens when you spiral your hand from the thumb first in both directions. That mine are going a bit weird because I'm concentrating on this recording. But it's incredible how quickly it gets you out of your left brain churning and thinking and into your, oh, why can't I do that? Or another lovely one is to take your fingers away and together, so thumb to fingers, and then open between first finger and middle finger, and then middle finger and ring finger, and then ring finger and pinky. And see if you can do that little finger dance. I'm losing it here as I'm showing you. And just these little proprioceptive dances, even if you're busy supposed to be doing something else, or you're waiting for something, you can preoccupy yourself instead of thinking, but with proprioceptive impulses. Another lovely thing you can do is sit quietly doing nothing, or stand softly and pause and wait for an impulse. So I'm sitting here and I've got an impulse to take my left ear to my left shoulder. And then roll my head. Or now my left elbow wants to move. So these are not new practices. I'm sure lots of you have got all sorts of different movement modalities where you bring this in. And dance is the most natural expression of the human body. We all love moving to music. I sometimes play music in my car and I just wiggle. Just sit and wiggle while I'm driving. I get some very funny looks at the traffic lights, but whatever. The point is not to judge yourself or your presence. These are invitations, not interventions. And they're invitations for you to explore what you don't know about yourself. The mystery of seeing what that inner wisdom in you has to express. It's like that thing about dance as if no one's watching, but it only has to be micro. And you're inquiring as to what's going on within you. And sometimes that what's going on within you can be like a gut feeling or a hunch. You know, when you say, I've got a really funny feeling about this, it's not the same as fretting about it. It's not like you've got to do an exam or you're going for a job interview and you're just like, and you've got butterflies in your tummy. Although that can be it, that can just be straight, oh my goodness. I know for myself, I did a huge exam to get into a school that I failed. And beforehand, I was completely and utterly terrified. And as an adult, whenever I had to have any sort of examination or be tested for anything, I recalled that fear instantly. But it was the fear of a 10-year-old or an 11-year-old going for a school entrance exam. And I was in a conference once remembering that fear, and I wanted to speak, and I started to tremble. And one of the keystones of this conference was we were looking at what happens when we respond authentically. And I discovered the most extraordinary thing. Those butterflies in my tummy, I call them a scrinch, were two things. One, they were a memory of a time when I was terrified. Thank you, my dear mother, who made me go and do the exam anyway, and experience that I could survive not passing and getting a, whatever it was, scholarship. I just didn't, so it was all good. I came out of it realizing I'd survived. I was terrified, I did it anyway, and I'd survived. And when I realized that I still had the butterflies in my tummy, but I didn't have to be the victim of them. They weren't stopping me. They were just telling me that what was about to happen mattered a lot to me. And in that moment, I discovered that somehow my conversation was so much more authentic when I had butterflies in my tummy. Because I couldn't make it up. I couldn't organize it in my left brain with the right words. I didn't know what the right words were. And my scrambled egg butterfly scrinch tummy was bringing me to a place of honesty about not knowing what was going to come out of my mouth, not knowing what wisdom or dumbness was going to come forward. And I discovered that if I still put my hand up and still spoke, what came out of my mouth made a bigger difference to me for having said it. Because it meant I was brave. It meant I had the courage to speak in front of a room, which has stood me in the most fantastic stead for the rest of my life, because I've ended up presenting all over the world and not knowing how I do it or how to do it beforehand. But I always welcome that feeling. And in actual fact, I would argue that if I don't have that feeling of scrinch and butterflies, I'm like, uh-oh, something's not right here. So my gut reaction is the absence of butterflies. My warning is, I don't care enough about this to be excited. And that's when I get very, very nervous that I've either missed the point, shouldn't be there, or I'm very, very definitely in the wrong place. I don't know if that makes any sense. It may sound backwards, but the wisdom of my fascia is definitely telling me that when it's all what my friend Ian used to call upsighted, which is a difference somewhere a cross between upset and excited, if I don't have my upsighted, squinchy butterfly feeling, it's not authentic. I'm not coming from an authentic place. And I will shut up until I get that feeling, which might mean I don't say anything. It might mean I need to listen. So what does this do? What's the point of all of this? The point is, and I really want to talk to you about joy and grief as stored signals inside of us, not necessarily blockages, but messages in our bodies that know we need to do something different. So, for example, if it's grief, they may be calling us to pause, to stop, to give in to the emotion, to let the river flow, as it were, and let ourselves be the way we are, without judgment, but just recognizing that it is that way. Joy, too. When you just find yourself giggling, it's as if the body knows that it's safe and it's really funny. It's an expression of something that's already there. Can you think of a time when your body knew something, or you felt that you could sense that something was a particular way before your mind described it? And just so you know, this is rooted in science. If you were on a motorbike and you had your visor up and a fly came and hit you in the eye, your eye would close before the fly hit you, even if you were driving at speed. Your fascia responds faster than your nervous system. Before you can think, you're there. So I just want to define for you, to finish up, a really clear example to help you get what the feeling is of intellect, instinct, and intuition. So let's say, for example, that you're learning to drive a car. And I remember the very first time I taught my son, gave him his first driving lesson. I didn't give him another one after that. I couldn't handle it. But I'll never forget, we got in the car and he was only 17, and bless him, his feet were so big I couldn't see which pedal he had his feet on. And I was sitting in the passenger seat in a big open car park. And we got in, and the first thing he said to me was, okay, how do I drive? And I was like, whoa, first we have to name everything in the car. That's how we name all our anatomy, right? We've got to name the parts. Oh, what do you mean? I said, I need to tell you what's in the car. Oh, but Mum, I've been watching you drive for years. Yeah, I know you have, but I haven't been teaching you to drive. That's a different thing. We start off naming all the things in the car. And I went through the indicators and the lights and the steering wheel and the pedals, and it was a manual car. The accelerator and the clutch and the brake and the gear stick and the handbrake. So I said, so you've got the accelerator and the brake and the clutch, and you've got the gear stick and the handbrake, and you do this with your left hand and this with your right hand. And he went, whoa, whoa, whoa. Why have I got a brake on the floor and a handbrake? Why do I need 2 brakes? And then he went, and why have I got 3 pedals and 2 feet? So I said, well, you use the accelerator and the brake with your right foot and the clutch with your left foot, because you should never have your feet on the accelerator and the brake at the same time. You'll blow the engine. Why? My son's very intelligent, but bear in mind, by this time, I've overloaded him with names, information, and the intellectual list of what he has to do. And he's like, okay, so I've got to do those 2 pedals with my right foot and that pedal with my left foot. And why do I need the handbrake? Well, when you've stopped, you don't need to hold your foot on the brake. You then use the handbrake. And you have to coordinate turning the handbrake off with the foot brake. And he's looking at me. He's got no concept of time in this process because he's never driven a car. Nor has he been able to see from watching me drive the car or anyone else what we're coordinating. So to start with, we don't know what we don't know in Edward de Bono's map. And we have to get an intellectual list of all the things that we need to know, like the steps in a dance, like the parts of the car. So what happens as we start working with trial and error and we bring the fascial matrix of our body to the game, we start practicing, we mimic, we do as we're told, we repeat. Imagine these are dance steps. We just do them again and again and again. This is the car. We keep trying, keep trying, keep trying. And gradually what happens is we go from don't know what I don't know to we begin to know what we don't know. We begin to get what's missing and that we need more practice. We begin to get a handle on what's going on. And gradually what's happening is your instinct with muscle memory, with tissue recall, with reflexes being incorporated from that practice, it becomes an instinctive process and you don't have to name the parts. Trust me, it was harder for me to name all the parts of the car than it was for him to learn them. Because I don't think about the names of the things that I'm working. I drive instinctively as a fluid matrix process, integrated me, the car, and years and years and years and years and years of experience. However, we still have the issue of the windows and the mirrors. Why do I need all these mirrors, Mum? What's going on? Well, at all times, you've got to be able to see what's happened behind you, be completely aware of what's happening in the car and on the road that your car is on. And you've got to look out of the window, the front windscreen, and anticipate what's going to happen. And it's not necessarily going to be in that order through the windows. Well, what do you mean? Well, if you look in the rearview mirror and suddenly somebody pulls out around you, you are going to intuit almost before it happens, that they're going to hit the oncoming car that you can see and they haven't. And you might want to get out the way. And I remember him looking at me on that first occasion, and I just thought, this is too much for me. I can't teach anyone to drive. My son is now an absolutely brilliant driver. But at the time, I'm using the example of how hard it was to break down what was an instinctive and intuitive process for me into an intellectual process for somebody who didn't know what they didn't know. First, they had to find out. Then they had to know what they didn't know. And then they go through that curve up to a place where they know they don't know what they know, because they're a very much better driver than they realise. And then eventually they get to a place where they know what they know and they can teach somebody else. And it's a brilliant curve, but it also explains an aspect of our, what we call muscle memory, but it's much more than that. I believe it's tissue memory, where we start off with something intellectually and we deduce it, and then we have to transition and translate into practice, into proprioception. And then it becomes almost, it's instinctive, but it's almost like we're unaware of it. And with that unawareness, we're not thinking about, oh, I'm about to go into first gear, I'm about to go into second gear, I'm about to turn right. We don't run a commentary on that, or at least we don't need to. We drive well because of the speed with which we can translate what's happening around us. And we become relaxed and we observe what's happening around us. Or we can. If we play the pauses and if we're present to what we're doing. You can ask yourself sometimes, what do you know that I haven't listened to yet? Your true self, your inner self. And listen, because sometimes it might come up with something that you haven't even thought of. For me, fascia is not just a file of old injuries. Trauma, joy, all sorts of things live in this tissue, seeking to find resolution. And sometimes we could consider that traumas are kind of knots in the net. But what I want you to think about a net is that a net is something that you can climb. A safety net has knotted parts that hold it together. So sometimes those knots in the net might seem bad, difficult, hard, injuries, illnesses, diseases, events in your life that you don't want to recall. But they might be knots in the net that could be brought into resolution, not so that you can undo them and make them go away, but so that you can turn them into something that is a source of your strength. Because if it's a living interface of your soul's journey, it can still talk to you about the wisdom of that experience. Maybe it holds wisdom as well as woe. And maybe one of our jobs in understanding fascia is to really recognize the alchemy that we can all perform. Carolyn Mace talks about turning the lead of our wounds into the gold of our gifts. And I think we can turn the knots in the net of our awareness into our ability to climb and transform it into a safety net. Because it's wisdom, it's woven wisdom in our systems. That's how I see it, it's how I experience it, it's how I share it with my clients. And I've watched probably thousands of people in the last 25 years of practicing feel empowered by recognizing that their fascia stores their inner wisdom if they know how to listen to it. So share in the comments with me if you've discovered anything in your world that your fascia wants to tell you that it already knows and that you can consider as your already spiritual embodiment. Take care. Tune in to this little mini series. There's more coming. and have a great day. God bless.